Hey guys, welcome to the third Patreon exclusive video. And in this video, we're going to talk about unbirthing and soft bore, which are two of the most popular extreme adult erotic fetishes, fictional fantasy fetishes that is, around. Now, for those of you that are wondering why they are in that category of being two of the most popular, adult erotic fictional fantasy fetishes around right now, it's real simple. You see, in my opinion, I look at it from the fact that this is all based on how, men and women, women and women, and sometimes men and men, get very intimate with each other, that they say things and mention things they would like to do with a partner, but no is impossible to do because that's fantasy, that's fiction. It's not reality. It's kind of like, as I've mentioned before in my public YouTube videos, it's kind of like with a scene from the classic 90s sitcom from CBS, Major Dad. In one of the scenes, the title character and his wife are laying in bed at a hotel they're staying at for the vacation, for the getaway. And the wife, as they're making out, says she's melting. Now, we know that since we know it's a live action sitcom, that it's impossible for her to literally melt into a puddle right there on the sheets. But when it comes to animation, and even comics, we know that if a character gets so hot, if you will, by being attracted to another, that them melting into a puddle is very, very possible. And there have been numerous examples of that in animation throughout the decades. Now, when it comes to comparing that to this, as I mentioned, from my own personal opinion, I believe it follows the same kind of category, the same kind of path, if you will, as being something that perhaps, and I don't know this from experience, I do not know this from experience, honest to God, but it follows the same path because perhaps men and women, women and women, and perhaps even men and men, like I say that to each other when they get really into that intimate mood of what they would like to do with the other, or what they would like to do with the other, or have the other do to them. That's basically where I think unbirthing and soft bore come into play. And this is why also I think a lot of people add them to the stories. Whether it's adult fan fiction with established, fictional characters of IPs, of well-known IPs or original stories, or it's, animations. It's web comics, it's individual fan art that's, continuity-wise separated by different panels on a daily basis, all that kind of stuff. And mostly, I think I just said this, stories itself, overall written stories themselves. And what's interesting about it is how sometimes these two fetishes are utilized in stories. In the adult fantasy stories, the web comics, the animations, you name it. It's kind of unique. It's kind of interesting and unique how it's utilized. Because sometimes the person that writes the story or writes the script for the comic, and even does the comic at times, will write it, so that the character that, let's say, gets unbirthed or soft bored, if you will, remains there for at least one night, and then they'll re-released back into the world the following day, either by being regurgitated after being soft bored or being rebirthed after being unbirthed. However, there are exceptions sometimes. Sometimes, people that write the stories like to allow their characters to have a little bit more intimate fun, and basically what they will do is they will allow the character that soft bores or unbirths the mate, if you will, to carry that individual around in their stomach or in their womb for at least a week, maybe a month, so they can have them intimately close to them, or when it comes to, like, let's say soft bore, or they can give, or their mate can give them that feeling of, being pregnant. In other words, having like a child and everything within them, and thus they are allowed to carry them in the womb for at least a week or a month to give them that feeling of, what it would be like to be pregnant with kids. I know that sounds strange to hear, but that's the truth. And there's a lot of stories out there, fan fiction-wise and original story-wise, that backs that up. And even web comics and animations. Now, when it comes to the unbirthing part, though, sometimes that gets taken to an even higher level. Now, sometimes a character will get, as I said, unbirthed by the partner, whether it's a woman unbirthing another woman or a man getting unbirthed by his girlfriend. And sometimes what will happen is, what I'm trying to say is sometimes what will happen is after that individual gets unbirthed and they end up into the womb of their girlfriend, if you will, or the woman that unbirthed them, sometimes the writer will add in the fact that while the person that's been unbirthed is in the womb, that an umbilical cord will come down and attach themselves to the belly button, if you will, of that individual that got unbirthed. And thus, the woman that unbirthed them will be able to sustain them through nutrients. Like when she eats, anything she eats will also go through the umbilical cord and sustain the person that's within the room. And that right there is some next level what when it comes to storytelling, because it's like, it's one thing for characters to want to be part of, somebody, give them the feeling of being all preggies and all that, as the saying goes. But it's another when the person that does it says, okay, here you go, boom, I'm going to attach this to you, and I'm going to be the one that feeds you and sustains you and all that. So, yeah, that's like taking it to another level. Now, as far as softcore goes, you might say, well, does that go any further? Sometimes it does, because sometimes softcore will basically involve the character not only being willingly eaten by the partner, but through some magical means allow themselves to be digested and absorbed into that person's body and then reconstituted through that magic about 24 hours later or even a few moments later, and that's it. So there is digestion involved. And sometimes, speaking of absorbing, sometimes the character will allow themselves to be eaten so they can be absorbed into the person's body that's eaten them. And by absorbing them, basically they will become one with them. And let's say the result will be additional arms, coming out, hair getting multicolored or whatever the case may be. But yeah, even softcore sometimes takes it to another level, if you know what I mean. But overall, when you look at both unbirthing and softcore, now you hopefully understand why they are the two most popular adult fantasy fictional fetishes, erotic-wise, around, and why they're utilized a lot when it comes to stories. So let me know what you guys think. Comment down below. Thank you for supporting the Patreon, and there will be more to come. And thank you for watching this Patreon exclusive YouTube video.